Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what should we expect from our lawmakers? Aloha and welcome to Insights. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now for Insights on PBS Hawaii. In less than a week, our lawmakers will begin the process of wading through thousands of proposed laws that tackle the challenges we face in our state. These 76 men and women will have to reach consensus and keep our budget balanced while addressing needs for new solutions to major problems. What issues should they address with your hard-earned tax dollars? What should we expect from our lawmakers? We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel. Senator Sam Sloan is the only Republican in the 25-member state Senate and serves as the minority leader. He was first elected in 1996 and represents the 8th District, Waikato to Diamond Head. Denby Fawcett is a columnist for the Honolulu Civil Beat, an online-only news outlet. She formerly worked alongside me at KITV4 News, the ABC affiliate in Hawaii, for 23 years, most recently as the chief political editor. Ikaika Hussey is the publisher of the Hawaii Independent, a digital news magazine publishing since 2008. He teaches journalism at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And finally, Representative Cindy Evans is the House Majority Floor Leader and has been representing North Kona and South Kohala since 2002. She is speaking tonight for the Democratic majority of the State House. And so let's start with you, Representative Evans. What can we look forward to? Are you folks ready? Will you really take on the tough issues this year, or are people going to be disappointed that nothing gets done?
Oh, absolutely. The tough issues, I don't think the House will veer away from any tough issues. The question is can we work and find collaboration and cooperation with all parties and all stakeholders as to what the answer is? And obviously we have the Senate. I'm glad to see Senator Sloan here. Yeah, I think the tough issues always have sometimes hard answers, and can we find the answer? When you have tough issues, it usually means you have different parties that are different stakeholders that disagree with one another, and they're very vocal. They may come to the state capitol and actually picket us. They may come in volumes of people coming to our offices. There may be petitions. There may be, you know, asking all these people, mayors, you know, coming from every corner of the state, telling us why they agree or disagree. I think the members, I mean, I'm proud to serve with the members. They're awesome, and they will not shy away from it. But the answers and the solutions, it's complicated.
Senator
we'll have to see.
What do you think is the main thing that usually knocks things off track?
Well, you know, it's interesting. And first of all, let me update you. I'm now in the 9th senatorial district after reapportionment.
The line moved. Okay.
The line moved, that's right. And your initial question is what should people expect? What they should expect is that their legislator is honest, that we work hard, and that we accomplish something. Look, the Democrats have such a tremendous majority in both the Senate and the House. In the House, there's only 7 Republicans out of 51. In the Senate, as you mentioned, I'm the only one out of 25. So you would think that these problems would have been solved a long time ago, but no, they're not. We talk about the same problems every year. We talk about budgetary problems and homelessness and health care and transportation. So it's more than just collaboration. And it certainly is not an idea that the Republicans have stood in the way. We have our own ideas. We have alternatives. Our big thing is transparency and accountability. And while a lot of people talk about transparency, the legislature and government in this community has gotten less transparent over the years, and the people resent that.
Denby Fawcett, you've covered a lot of legislative sessions. What is the most common thing you've seen when things don't get done?
Well, they come back again the next year, but I think in this legislation, this session is going to be different, and it's not going to have the sexy issues, the really juicy things, I think, that we've seen like in 2013 with same-sex marriage.
There will be juice, there will be sex.
Do pop up. But I think it's going to be a session of dealing with issues that have been festering for a long time, i.e. the state public hospitals, the Hawaii Health Connector, homelessness, I don't know, that's not going to be an immediate thing. And then the rail coming back again, you know, what do they do without the money? That would probably be, to me, a very juicy issue.
Okay, we'll actually spend quite a bit of time going through a lot of individual issues. I'm looking forward to that tonight, and hopefully our viewers will give us some things to chew on. But Ikaika Hussey, what do you think you'd like to see the legislature really take on? And Demby mentioned some of these very long, difficult questions and issues. What would you like to see them do?
You know, from the media perspective, I would love to see a robust public dialogue about some of these really tough issues like the ones that Demby mentioned. And I think that that's a job that both the legislature and also the, you know, those of us who observe it and comment on it and analyze it from the outside, that's sort of our kuleana, is to keep raising the dialogue up and making sure that it moves beyond, you know, the square building on Beretania Street, as Perry and Price used to say. We need to elevate the discussion a bit.
Let me throw this question to Representative Evans. You know, the way the budget's structured now, there is absolutely several years of deficit spending in line, primarily because the legislature and the prior governors have committed to essentially paying for public worker raises, other expenses out of the carryover. So at some point, you're going to have to figure out how to make money. Isn't that going to be is that an issue you'll face this year, or is that one that's going to get kicked down the road?
No, I think we have to face how we're going to make money. There's a lot of things looming. The military, if we're downsizing and we're going to lose jobs, the rising cost of health care. You're right, the wages in our Hawaii health systems, you know, finding the money that was bargained for the raises, for the wages, where we're going to find that money. Unfunded pension liability, one of the things that everybody needs to know. People are retiring and living longer, and I'm seeing a lot of retirement with government employees. So we're going to have fixed costs that we have no choice to deal with. And so we're going to have to really work hard on the economy and what is it going to take to help the high-tech innovation, research, high-tech, maybe aerospace, maybe whatever the small business community believes they need to attract new business and to get this economy booming. I'm kind of excited because some of my colleagues are really trying to think out of the box, be it tax incentives, tax credits. I think there's going to be a lot of proposals like you opened up with. You know, we're going to have several thousand bills. Talking to some of my colleagues in the hallways, clearly they're thinking how we're going to generate more money.
Senator, do you think that there's any way that you'll be at the end of the session not stomping your feet over either fees or tax increases?
Gee, I hope not, Daryl. You know, you pose the question, how are we going to make more money? That's only part of the question. How are we going to cut expenses? How are we going to cut debt? Representative Evans correctly mentioned unfunded liability. That unfunded liability between the retirement system and the healthcare system is $25 billion. $25 billion. The state budget that the governor has just submitted is $25 billion. The rail is $6 billion, $9 billion, whatever figure. We don't have that kind of money. We have a tax base of 1.3 million people. We're one of the most overtaxed, overregulated communities, and that's why that's hampered our business community. We have businesses coming in every year telling us what they need, telling us how to create jobs, and then we go, okay, send in the unions, and let's give them more money. We can't do that. We've got to change the paradigm. For the last 4 years, the Senate minority has provided an alternative budget. We put it up online. We make it available. The state budget's going up like this. The minority budget's going like that. We have to live within our own means, just like every single mom, every small business, and every other person in this community. We haven't done that.
Ikaika Hussey, as your publication, I run out of words for the internet, but publication, I'll call it a publication, is very interactive, right? I mean, you hear from your readers. When you talk about billions here and billions there, are they wrapping their heads around that? Are you getting what you think are good ideas from your readers, you know, when there's civil discourse? What kind of ideas are they coming up with? What kind of things are they wanting to see? Yeah,
I don't think the units are a problem. You know, we can handle billions and millions. I think the problem, though, is really a question of priorities. And I think our state can raise money. I would hesitate to, well, I hope that the way that we raise money isn't simply by incentivizing the special interest that you were describing, but finding ways to, for instance, modernize our tax system so that we're not putting a disproportionate share of the burden on the poor, like the Appleseed report came out this week indicates. I'd also like to see us shift the burden away from an income tax and a GET to something like a carbon tax, something that's a little bit more progressive, both in terms of the economics of it and also the ecological impact.
Maybe, Fawcett, you've seen these arguments play out almost word for word before what we've just heard. What do you think? Where do you picture at the end? I mean, are they going to need to raise some money or cut drastically, or what's the chance the Democratic legislature is going to cut drastically?
Joe Souki says there are going to be no new taxes this year, he believes, but then you have this rail tax, the extension of the surcharge,
right.
And to me that's a new tax.
You're right.
Because if it ends it's supposed to end at a certain date, and
22.
then you jack it up again, 22. But what I would like to see would be a more engaged public. I mean, I've written about this tax, and it's so discouraging to me to see some of the comments online from people saying, oh, well, what do you expect? We always knew it would be forever, the rail tax, you know, and not being madder about it. So that's what I wish for, a more engaged public.
Denby brings up a good point. First of all, the engagement. Really, you could change things here if you had more than 48% of the people voting, and if they came down to the legislature or did that. But the other thing is, it's such a phony argument when we pass bills and we put a 3-year or 5-year sunset on them. The only bill that I remember that we actually stayed with the sunset was the Journalism Shield bill, because Clayton, he didn't like it. And so we got rid of it. Everything else, particularly when you're talking about taxes and fees, they last forever. They're in perpetuity. And we've got to change that. And if we're talking about more revenues, we should be talking about improving our business climate and making it more hospitable. Every rating that comes out nationally, and you all see them on almost a weekly basis, ranks us down at the bottom in terms of economic vitality and economic opportunity, 49th or 50th. We've got to change that because we have opportunities, but yet we have investment overflying us eastbound and westbound. That's got to change.
Representative Evans, one question that's sure to be, has to be dealt with this year is the sunsetting of the higher tax brackets that higher income folks have been living with since the recession hit. So that's something that either this year or early next year, you know, it's a chance for the legislature to allow a tax break to happen for the highest income people because they've been paying more since the legislature raised those taxes. And there's a sunset on there. Do you think there's any way that the legislature could afford to let that sunset, or will that higher tax bracket for the higher income stay?
I don't feel I'm in a position to answer because you know, whatever the financial plan is, however we talk about our priorities, however it rolls out, there's several of us, Democrats, there's conservatives and liberals, and there's within our own party. And I do think that there's some people that want to lower the income tax. I think people want to get money back into.
Correct.
Yeah,
like
I think. Yeah, I think people
down to 8.4.
Yeah, we want to get people money back to the people so they can infuse it and buy things and stimulate the economy. There's a lot of us that believe that, but there's other ones that don't. So it's all in the dialogue. And I have to comment on what Senator Sloan said. When you talk about engagement, that needs to, this discussion, your question needs to have that engagement with the public. They need to come and talk to us about it. But part of engagement is why we need, you know, the reporting. Because you're right, because people will engage with you a lot of times if they feel they understand it. So they need to have the information, they need to frame it, they need to believe that they can have an intelligent or feel that they're comfortable with the dialogue. They may come to you and say, well, I want to learn more about it, but they don't really know how to weigh in on it if they don't understand it. Some of the issues that we talk about are pretty complicated, you know, and so when you talk about changing tax and what group, you know, are you going to do it across the board, you know, at all levels, you know, is that going to work? We have the University of Hawaii Economic, we have Council of Revenues, we have all these like professionals that want to weigh in and tell us. But we really want to hear from the average person. But the average person needs a little bit of education, and that's why what you're doing tonight, and I hope people are watching, realize that we're trying to educate you on a lot of this so that you can call your legislator, you can talk to your legislator when you see them, that you can really start maybe having that dialogue.
And Debbie Fawcett, what is the main barrier, you think, to public participation, to the public actually coming in and participating then?
Well, I think they believe that they don't matter. That's what you hear from people.
That's kind of a big barrier.
Yeah, no matter what I think, I see the opposite happening,
Well, you got something else, too. We make it hard for them to park or access. We do it on our schedule, which is when they're working or taking care of their family or whatever. So they have to take time off, and oftentimes our hearings either run long or they start late, and it's very inconvenient. It's very inconsiderate, and I think we should be more attuned and encouraging people to come by and do that. We haven't done that good a job, and it's an easy thing to change.
Let me throw
out tickets at the Capitol.
Yeah, 40 bucks a throw. That's right. That's a good revenue source. Well, you want new revenue or more money. There it is.
Charge you money to come in. You actually get the money into the taxpayers instead of the politicians to get access. Moses from Nanakuli is suggesting something along these lines about access, I think. Why don't they lengthen the legislative session beyond 4 months, given the number of bills that need reviewing? I mean, I know that's a terrifying idea.
It is terrifying. It should be terrifying to Moses, too. I mean, it's bad enough that we're only there until May. We're technically a part-time legislature, although all of us work year-round and we have meetings.
You're hustling, you're trying to cover it. The compacted schedule makes it very difficult to cover and report on everything you want, right?
I don't know if that alone would be the fix. I mean, there's a number of things we could do to make our legislature work better. Some people have talked about making a unicameral body. We could move back to multi-member districts so that there could be more, minority voices essentially that could come up through the system. There's a lot of things we can do, and certainly we should make it easier to park at the Capitol.
Yeah.
I mean, why do we need to park when we have absolutely virtual access? I mean,
take the rail, the train to nowhere, from Kapolei to Kapolei. Yeah.
But I mean, both houses now have basically, you can go, anybody can go and look at all the testimony on a bill. You could submit very easily and so on. But I mean, are we actually seeing any increase in public participation? I just to ask you this question again, like to bounce off what Denby says, is it that do people just don't believe that anybody's listening?
I think there's two answers to this. One is, actually maybe three. The first is that Hawaii has a long history of activism being actually quite effective. There were plans to develop most of this island, and a lot of those plans failed because of grassroots organizing, grassroots activism. The second thing is, I do think that there is a culture or a sense that government is essentially inflexible. And the third thing is that there used to be a culture in Hawaii of really high-minded civil debate within the newspapers, within the public sphere, and I'm talking about the 19th century. Throughout that entire century, there were Hawaiian language newspapers and English language press in which there were regular debates, there were people arguing with each other, and there were responses from the government within the paper. I'd like to see some of that from Governor Ige. I would love for him to communicate plainly with the public that he represents.
Okay, some more specific questions coming in now from our viewers. Mark from Alewa Heights, and let me have Representative Evans deal with this one first. Will the legislature ever reprioritize spending as opposed to increasing taxes? The question, I think, being, do the Democratic legislature, do you have the capability of actually cutting programs instead of just trying to keep the revenue up with the programs?
Well, first of all, I think we'd have to make a decision as to what service we're going to cut from government, because we've all gotten used to Department of Agriculture and what they do, invasive species and inspections, and we've looked at what Department of Health does and environmental health. You go through all the departments and you understand what those basic services are, and you understand how the public has come to accept, I think, what those services are and how government works with the community, because it's all about us working collectively together. My take on it is with this governor and with what I'm hearing is that we don't want to expand and increase and add more programs. What we want to do is take what we already do, what the public knows what we do, and do it better. And then maybe in the process of doing it better and more efficiently and effectively, and we're having that discussion on how to do it, maybe we'll find things we don't need to do anymore. Maybe technology's gotten better. Maybe maybe we've moved on and past really needing to have that need. And I think with the evaluation, which I think Governor Ige is going to do, I think you're going to see that hopefully we will get rid of some programs. But the reality is this year is not about adding programs. This is about looking at what we do.
Yeah,
Isn't it the case, though, Representative, that there are many programs which are actually underfunded?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, the program within the Department of Ag, he's going to disagree, that protects us from invasive species, and also, various health issues. Those are underfunded, aren't they? Aren't there not enough inspectors who are checking?
Well,
yeah, but I think the question was about prioritizing. I think that your government is doing what we've created over X amount of years, that we've wanted. Everybody collectively has decided this is what government is doing. I don't think that Ige and us at the legislature, personally, I don't think we're looking at expanding and adding new stuff. We're looking at what we're doing, and then you're right, if we underfund it, and we know what the programs that are there, and we decide that we have to reprioritize with what we already do, we'll only be able to do it with the pot of money we have, because I don't believe in my heart that we're looking at like growing, we're looking at being more effective at what we do. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about underfunding, we may have to live with the funding that we have, but make it more efficient. Maybe you can do more things and still get better results. It's all about getting better results. And does it really mean more money? I don't know if it needs more money.
When somebody tries to define what I'm thinking. As a matter of fact, I went to the invasive species hearing yesterday, and I agree, because the potential disaster for Hawaii is tremendous, and I think that should be funded adequately, and I think we should address those things. But the problem is everybody comes in. We've had 2 weeks now of budget hearings, preliminary hearings, House and Senate, and everybody comes in and their wants are priority number one. So they haven't learned, and the majority of the legislature hasn't learned how to say no. And occasionally you have to say no, and you do have to prioritize.
Okay, so, this is a question that did come in specifically to you. Okay. What cuts would you propose? What services would you do away with in order to start, in your case, reducing spending, but also, we've heard, well, we do things to get out of the way of business so there's more revenue coming in. How about specific services that you would get rid of, that we don't need to do?
Well, I said earlier, we do an alternative budget every year. We're very specific on programs and all of that. First of all, my alma mater, the University of Hawaii. Love the University of Hawaii. Hate what they've been doing recently, and how they've wasted money, how they've misspent money, how the athletic department has had deficits 11 out of the 13 years, and they have the audacity to come and ask the taxpayers to bail them out. Hawaii Healthcare Systems Corporation. Deficits every year, yet they used money to raise their salaries and things like that. They've got to be held accountable. And then there's special funds that the auditor has finally agreed with some of us who've been on that bandwagon for years, that those funds should not be special funds, that they should not be rated, that they are not meeting their purpose and all that. So ideally there's money there. Also in Department of Business and Economic Development. It's got all of these attached agencies to it, and it's not helping the business community. So I would reduce money there. There's a lot of places, and I said we'd be glad to show you specifically where we've come down on it.
So cut UH, cut hospitals, and cut DBED.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And cut welfare. What a joke. #1 in the nation in food stamps, #1 in the nation in homelessness, #1 in the nation in the amount of money that we give to people. Now, I have no problem with helping those people that through no fault of their own need assistance. But we got people gaming the system. The stories come out all the time. You used to report it, you used to report it, of people, you know, living high on the hog, but they're getting these benefits and all that. We don't do a good enough oversight job. We just hand out the money because we've had it to do in the past. Now we're not going to have that money.
Debbie Fawcett, you've covered this exact debate a number of times. How does it play out from here? What happens now when you get these kind of conflicting views?
Well, I think we've got a new governor that's going to come in differently than we've seen in the past, and he's different. And one thing, you see this in a tiny way, like at Christmas time,
that was
when
amazing.
it took away the
Half day.
public workers get either a half, they get a day off extra from the governor every year. It can be either Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, or you could take a half day to make one day. And he just said no, that they get enough holidays. They get 21 days of vacation, 13 holidays. If you want those days off, you take a vacation day. And the mayor still gives that free day.
And so does the legislature.
And the legislature as well.
I respect the governor. I've known him for more than 2 decades.
Different.
He's different. First of all, he's got a background as an engineer, not a community organizer. I like that. I've worked under him in various committees. He's very deliberate, he's very thoughtful, and he's very honest. And so I think, and the people that he's picked so far for the cabinet that the Senate gets to confirm, I think they're very good. We're waiting for the Attorney General's appointment and DLNR.
Thing that people talk about this every year, collecting more taxes that are uncollected without raising the taxes.
Well, Lingo talked about that, and we've never reached the goals that they talked about. He might be
the one that could do it, you know. And there's so many taxes out there that either aren't paid.
Modernization, and we've spent millions of dollars on modernization. We've gotten poor contracts. There's been no oversight on the contracts. We had some disastrous results and lousy vendors. Nobody's held these people accountable. Now, the Senate President, Donna Mercado Kim, when she comes into a room, a lot of these guys flinch because she's going to ask the tough questions, and so am I. And it's time that more of our colleagues do that and not only ask the questions, but demand the answers and hold these folks accountable, because there is money out there that should be collected.
Representative Evans, you heard Senator Sloan make some very specific recommendations, but you know, he's one Republican in a House, in a Senate of 25. There's only 6 in the House. I thought we lost one. You went from 8 to 7. Okay. Yeah. I mean, are these discussions in the House and in the Senate basically between middle and left, without really involving these more aggressive ideas about reducing government? I mean, is reducing government really even part of the conversation among the Democrats?
Reductions, normally you don't see it. I agree with Sam. Normally you don't see reductions. What we do talk a lot about is efficiencies and effectiveness. Can we help them get software programs and computers and training so that the government employees do a more efficient job? Can we use modern technologies so now that we can be like the businesses that, you know, they have to keep up with technology. We've done a pretty poor job, I think, in funding that, but we've made up for it in the last few years. We've infused
one little
money.
story I was just recently looking into was the technology jobs were filled in order to redo technology, but they discovered that, if we actually use technology to replace jobs, the HGA will come in and fight it and go to the legislature and say, oh, no, you can't do that. I mean, structurally, can the Democrats take on HGA and UPW when it comes to, even if an efficiency says you don't need a job, are you willing to actually eliminate those positions?
I think you always have to work with the employee that's really dedicated to state. I've met state employees, they're awesome, but when you have technology, we have to step up to the plate and do training. I mean, you know, someone who's been working a job and all of a sudden you bring in a new software system and new technology, we have to train them. We can't assume that they're just going to be able to immediately adjust. I think you have to work with the unions. You have to talk about how do you, like, not only retool the way you do business, but how you work with the employees that are there and you move them and help them. And so I'm hoping with the new administration, we put a lot of effort in our human resources department and also the human resources within each division. You know, I believe that the governor, if he picks the right person to run, the right cabinet person and deputy directors, that they'll get in the trenches. They're there to make sure those employees have what they need to do the job for the people. If it needs training, if it needs the technology, we need to work with the employees. So it's not about union versus, that's not the discussion for me. That's like giving the people what they need to do their job.
Okay, good. We've hit about the midway part of our program. The next part of the program, I've got a lot of very specific issue questions, so we'll start hitting those. Tonight we are having a discussion about what we should expect from our lawmakers. We invite you to join the conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 on Oahu and 800-283-4847 from the neighbor islands. Let me take the next question to you, Ikaika Hussey. This is a question about, essentially about, I think it's about GMOs, but it's a key question within the GMO debate. What work will legislators do, what must they do to protect Kauai residents, and I think this could be expanded to all islands, from ongoing exposure to agricultural chemicals? How big an issue do you think this is going to be? And is this a must-solve issue for this legislature?
I think it's a legislature-wide issue. It's also an issue that affects, that each county is dealing with individually. And I think one of the kind of the meta issue is it's a home rule question. Can the counties decide their own fate in regards to GMOs, or is this something that the state is going to take control over and decide on their behalf?
Well, haven't the courts already decided on Denby Fawcett that this is a statewide issue? I mean, they're not letting the counties regulate this.
Yeah. And then now people are even talking about labeling being a national issue. Mm-hmm. And that's a very popular bill among many people, labeling who don't get so ramped up about GMOs, but agree we should all know what's in our food. Right. But I think we'll be hanging back on that here too as well, to wait nationally. Oh,
you think, Sam Sloan, do you think that this is going to be an issue that gets kicked down the road again?
It'll absolutely be talked about, and in the Senate with the reorganization, there was a change in the Agriculture Committee from somebody who was fighting GMOs, basically, or at least listening to the farmers, to someone who is pro or anti-GMO, but that's not the case in the House, so we're going to see butting of heads again. But it will be a major issue continuing, certainly.
Does the House have Representative Evans, does the House have a commitment to dealing with this issue?
Well, it's very important to people, so it's not going to go away, and we will deal with it. There will be hearings on it. I'm sure there'll be quite a few bills on it. I expect that's been big on Hawaii Island, and the council there had actually passed a resolution on it. I believe that one of the things I'm hearing from farmers is the debate for them is who should be really talking about farming practices and what are best practices, and you know, who should take the lead on what's the right way to farm. And so should we have people that aren't farmers, that are not regulated by the federal government with all these regulations that have come down from the feds on how you handle food, how you grow food, you know, pesticides, the testing of it, the management of it, whatever. Should we give that over to just local people to decide that they know more about farming practices? I mean, or should the discussion move to what I think personally it should move to is the living next door to something where there might be some pesticides that drift over into your household or to a school ground and the kids get sick. So is the question really about pesticides and chemicals and the impact of people, or is it about farming practices? I think we need to keep the discussion. Personally, I'd like to keep the discussion separate, but I think it gets sometimes wrapped up in, you know, it gets wrapped up.
Yeah, Debbie Fawcett, do you think that that's essentially, have you seen the legislature successfully grapple with that kind of issue where it gets very complicated and extremely emotional. It seems like these are the hardest issues for legislators to deal with. What's the tactic do you think that might work for them if they actually try and address the GMO issue and the multiple issues within that?
I think it's taking a small part of it, you know, just to satisfy the people that oppose GMOs, but won't harm the farmers too much, and maybe something like pesticides, you know, because everyone, and we already do regulate pesticides.
Do you think that would satisfy the folks that really want to see a real clampdown on GMOs?
So I think what's interesting is that the people who, a lot of the folks who want regulation of GMOs, many of them can afford to not buy products that have GMOs, and can shop at an institution like Whole Foods, where there's a lot of selection of organic and non-GMO products. The problem is where you run into situations where folks can't afford to make that choice. And so I think that there's an equity issue. For people who have no choice but to shop at a fast food restaurant, for instance, where there's really no transparency and labeling doesn't exist. That's the piece where it really requires government involvement.
This is one of those balancing tests the government has to go through. But in terms of what Debbie Fawcett was mentioning and what Representative Evans was mentioning, do you think that resolution on the pesticide issue might satisfy the folks who really want the whole banana?
No, I don't.
No.
I agree with that. No, I don't. I agree with Representative Evans, though, that you've got a lot of people telling farmers how to farm, just like you have a lot of people that are not in business and never met a private payroll telling those of us in business what we should do. It's completely different. Look, we make agriculture a big deal in Hawaii. It's in our Constitution. And yet, what do? We stand by as the prime agricultural lands go into development, go into other uses and all of that. We have less and less people farming. We have more and more problems and regulations. So we say one thing and we do another thing. And having long discussions with some of the activists and the anti-GMO movement, they won't be satisfied. They won't be satisfied with any of these pieces. So that's one of the things we'll have to look at. More discussion is better.
Just looking at what a legislature does, you take a teeny piece, but not the whole.
But I have to disagree with the Kaika. I love fast foods. You go into McDonald's or any of the fast food restaurants, there's all the labeling information, the nutrition information. They've done that for years now. So maybe I'll take you. I'll get you a hamburger. How's that?
Oh, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, good.
It doesn't tell you GMO, though.
Yeah.
It just tells you the calories. And
it's not going to tell you whether or not a product is GMO
Well, it was suggested during the hearings last year, why don't the people, like the organic farmers, who slap something on, this is totally organic, why don't the people that say we don't use GMO at all, put their label on and say it's GMO free? And it's not just a question of what you can afford, it's a question of what your lifestyle is and free choice in what you buy.
But many businesses already do that because they know that they can actually charge a premium for that product.
Well,
it's more desirable.
Yeah, but if your issue is knowing what's in my food or knowing where it comes from, I'm saying that, yes, I agree with you, that it's already being done for the most part. Yeah. I
wanted to add that I do think we're into a supply and demand discussion also, that I think that, at least I can speak for my district, I think there's more people telling me they'd like to have more choice and have more non-GMO, what they think's non-GMO, in the stores for them to buy. So I'm hoping that the farming community, agricultural community will respond, and maybe if they start supplying more, they'll see more people buying it. So I think maybe, I'm kind of hoping the market will kind of help drive the discussion instead of having the legislature kind of do their, pushing the market in one way.
And the market will. The market always has. And it's kind of like what we were talking about, getting people involved in the legislature. The people don't have any problem suggesting what people should do, and the market responds to that. If you've got a lot of people saying, we don't want this, look at the changes that have been made in restaurants and even in fast foods. What they provide. That is a market reaction, and it should be. I agree with you.
But the market won't solve the entire problem. It won't solve for the bottom 20%.
Okay, let me move on to some of we've got several cards here from people who mentioned on the same cards Two potential revenue sources, one legal gambling and the other legal marijuana. Let's start with marijuana. Where are we with marijuana this year? What progress perhaps on medical marijuana? What potential for, which opens the door for potential revenue? Is that something that the majority in the House is looking at as something that could actually generate money?
I know it'll be discussed. I know it's going to come forward. I think there's going to be discussion about legalizing marijuana, and then how do we get medical marijuana changed so that it can be dispensed. Both of them are going to be on the table. I haven't surveyed my colleagues to find out where they're going to weigh in one way or another. But when we talk about little steps on GMO, possibly one of the little steps to legalizing marijuana is to really get these medical marijuana dispensaries up and running and learn how to manage it. Learn how to manage it, how to inspect, how to control it, how to, have inspectors and enforcement, collect money. I mean, maybe that baby step is really get the medical marijuana dispensary going before you make the leap to legalizing. We'll see how much my colleagues are willing to move, just like on GMO.
Senator Sloan, how do you think the Republicans would respond to that, or how would you respond to that?
Well, I was the 13th vote in the Senate originally, a decade ago, to legalize medical marijuana. But as far as legalizing marijuana, you've got the law enforcement community still in total opposition. I agree with Representative Evans. I think the real issue this year that has a good chance of passing would be the medical dispensaries. But it's not as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of unintended consequences. There's a lot of money involved, as we've seen in the state of Colorado, but the money doesn't always go to where it was supposed to go to, and there's not always good oversight. Same with gambling. A lot of money, but whether or not it's going to go there. So you're going to see legalization bills and gambling bills and physician-assisted suicide bills at the beginning of the session, as you always do. But at the end of the session, I doubt that they will pass.
Yeah. The move between people I've spoken with is the dispensaries. I mean, if they do get done this year, that's a priority. And then legalizing marijuana, decriminalizing it will not happen.
Ikakahasi, you've made a number of comments today about the plight of the poor in this state. And we've kind of avoided it up to now, but I do have several cards here. Karen in Kailua, I'm a former teacher and I'm now nearly homeless because I can't afford to live here. I have no family here. What can I expect from the legislature on behalf of the homeless? Kanoa in Waianae, since we have a major homeless problem, are they going to take the initiative to build more homeless shelters? And earlier you mentioned the regressiveness of our tax system that relies so much on the excise tax. How important do you think it is that the legislature focus on the poor and actually produce something that is going to make their lives tangibly better?
I think the legislature should focus on our state motto, which is "Wa mauke o kaini kopono." The life of the land, the well-being of the land and the people should be perpetuated. And I don't, with respect to everyone in the room, I think that we need to make that more of a priority, and keep that as a focus for the state. And so, to me, that means that yes, we should think about how the most impoverished in our community are faring. If they're not doing well, then that reflects poorly on our ability to care for our community.
Representative Evans, for a state that is controlled by the Democratic Party, we are getting a lot of bad raps for the way the poor are faring in our community. Is that one of the themes that you discussed earlier, that you folks are focusing on? What do we do for the poor?
It always comes up every year. It always will, because you'll always have poor. That never goes away. But the thing is how do you break the cycle of poverty, or how do you empower a local community to deal with poverty? I can just speak from the Big Island. We're a rural community, and one of the things that happens is we have really lack of good transportation. So we can't really get our kids to the community colleges or to the tech schools or to the university. It's too much. I mean, they can't afford the gas, they can't get to the schooling, they can't get, and then you get these little isolated remote communities, and they don't see the choices or the opportunities for them. So if you can actually believe that there is opportunity, then you may find the passion. Like, I don't know what hooked you to be what you're going to be, but I got hooked in the 8th grade. I was exposed. I had the right teacher. I had the right opportunity. I lived in a college town. I got to go over and I saw. That's why robotics is so wonderful. The championships and the competition and, you know, the STEM movement, science, technology, engineering, math, putting stuff. So one of the things we could do is like put stuff in the schools. And get the kids that are probably headed towards poverty or headed towards not knowing how to, you know, get out of poverty, that they're just going to assume that they're going to drug deal or they're going to do whatever, and give them hope.
Forgive me for this, though. I think that what these viewers are asking about is immediate, short-term solutions to a crisis that exists today. You know, the answer of education is a long-term solution,
right.
But what about, you know, where are you going to find the money to make sure people are housed and make sure they're fed? And I think that's the questions that I'm getting here.
You need the housing, and I think I like what the city's doing. I like that housing first, because you talk about robotics and these good. If children aren't going to school, or if they come home and they have no place to do their homework, or they can't have access to a computer. So with the housing first, it's not for every type of homeless person. It's not for the person that comes here from the mainland that just wants to mooch off the beach. It's not for someone severely mentally ill. But I think what the city's doing is good. And then I think the state plan also to look into these portable containers. My daughter lived in one of those in Afghanistan. And it's not bad. You know, they had whole barracks made of those.
Do you feel like, though, that the legislature doesn't really want to face these issues?
I think that they do, absolutely. And I think, broadly speaking, Hawaii cares about these issues. Everyone feels bad when they see people in their own family or strangers on the street who are not doing well. But I don't think that the answer is going to be found in cutting like welfare programs, for instance. I actually think that the structural problem is we need to shrink the gap between the rich and the poor. There needs to be there shouldn't be quite that delta, that distance.
Okay, let me move on to another issue that I've gotten a couple of calls about. One caller writes specifically, I hear, Senator Sloan, you support a concealed weapon law. Do you think it's okay for someone to conceal a gun and walk into grocery stores, post offices, churches, and schools?
I do. And with what we've seen, particularly on the mainland and in foreign countries, where you've disarmed the citizenry and you basically are telling those people with guns, the criminals or the terrorists, a como mai, walk in and everybody gets killed. If you had somebody that had a concealed weapon, or if you gave pause for the terrorists to think maybe somebody does. But we do it backwards. We take schools, for example, and say proudly, there's no guns here on this campus, and so where have all the tragic events been? Or in Aurora, Colorado, with the theater that had big signs, no firearms allowed. That's not an answer to everything, but it is a partial answer, and it's something that at least should be discussed and considered, and the Senate minority is going to be advocating that again this year.
House majority, though, any chance of even getting a hearing on a bill like that, really?
You know, I'm not the Judiciary Chair, and I don't want to put words in the mouth of the Judiciary Committee. If it gets a hearing, it would have to get the votes to come out of that committee, and I just can't comment on. It's one of those, we were talking earlier about GMO. This is an emotional issue because, like, I grew up where, you know, uncles were hunting all the time and there was guns everywhere and there was guns hanging, you know, and I was around it. I was comfortable with it. There's a lot of people that live in an urban environment that never see a gun or are exposed to a gun, and they believe guns are violence and crime. So they equate it with a negative when the reality is, and I agree with Senator Sloan, that, you know, it's about protection, and it's a tool to protect your family,
And
or
more
it's
than
a tool to
45
go,
states have concealed carry.
or it's a tool to protect your family, or it's a tool to go hunting.
Let me
It's
ask
not
you,
a bad thing.
You do mention though that it is an emotional issue, and Denby, just recently, in order to dispatch the same-sex marriage issue, they actually put it in a special session because the chance it would just blow up the regular session. What tends to happen when an issue like that comes up? What do they tend to do in the legislature when it's that emotional?
One thing, that they want to get rid of it fast so it doesn't dominate the rest of the session, and because we've seen that happen in the early days of same-sex marriage, it just took over everything and no one concentrated. So they try to do that, and if it's something like your bill, which I think they dispatch very fast.
It's hard to get a hearing.
I mean, how many times have you tried, you know, even with your logic about it? So that would be dispatched fast. If it's something that has the weight of the public, bottled up, just taken out of the mix. If it's something that has public support, then it will be maybe a special session.
You bring up another interesting
Well, let me,
point.
I wanted to pitch in on this. Go ahead.
Sorry, Senator.
Sure.
I just wanted to add that politics in Hawaii is organic. Issues bubble up through kind of familial association, from dinner tables through organizations and civic groups,
from crisis and
churches.
Big news stories. Also. Right.
Well, I suppose, but big changes like same-sex marriage, that's been decades, you could say centuries in the making, right? And it didn't just happen because someone wrote a story or because of people on television.
Right.
Society changed.
Married. Right. Society changed, and it took a long time. It's slow by slow. I don't see, frankly, a groundswell, a desire within the community for concealed weapons.
Okay.
Well, you don't know until you have a hearing. That's number one.
I don't think that.
Number two, the point I wanted to make, we talked about other issues. It's absolutely true. Emotion trumps logic every time. You can have an issue, whatever it is, GMO or firearms or whatever. You can show the statistics, you can show the actual events, but the emotions always take over and carry the day.
And fear is often the most powerful emotion in those things.
Can be.
I agree.
Okay, and a question keeps popping back up. We've talked about it earlier, the rail. Okay, the mayor made it unequivocally he's going to come in and try and have the sunset taken off of that tax. He will say that the viability of the rail project is at stake. Senator Sloan, I can guess what you would say to that.
Well, I was one of the 8 plaintiffs. It took us 2 years and a lot of private money because the city lied to the taxpayers about what the cost would be. We said 7 years ago they were going to have overruns, they were going to have delays, and we're going to do that. If Mayor Caldwell wants to have this extra money, I think he should take out a loan himself and reach in his own pocket. We cannot afford to let this project continue and to extend the general excise tax or increases in real property taxes, which he wants also.
Ikaka, is Mike ready for that one?
I think transportation, like on the Big Island in Honolulu, is a public issue, and it requires public investment. And I'd like to add a new ingredient into this conversation, which is perhaps we should think about ways to give our counties more latitude, power in raising money, more flexibility.
As a representative of the Big Island, it often comes up. I know that Senator Sloan favors a lot of releasing more authority to the counties. Do you think that that's something on a possibility? The state is very centralized. Power is centralized. Are the Democrats ready to let that go?
It's mixed. It's very mixed. I think I hear different things from different colleagues, and I'm looking forward actually to what the 4 mayors are going to say when they come to us. I think the mayors have talked with one another about what they believe if they ask the legislature to release them to do taxing at the local level. I'm curious what they're going to come to us with this year. They've approached us before and talked about it, but I don't know if the 4 of them collectively have reached any decision on how they're going to talk about the GET. We're clear on what the mayor of the city and county of Honolulu wants.
Do you think he's got a chance of getting that?
I do. I mean, I do only in the sense that a lot of times when you have a public investment and the commitment's there and you have obligations and you've got the contracts and everything is rolling, I just think stopping it is going to be difficult to stop something that's started.
I think you're right, and it makes me sad that people won't fight it more, the public, and be more upset about it, and just say, well, it's only a 0.5%, which it's not. It's a 12.5% increase.
Correct.
So I agree with you, but I think the mayors will not get the excise tax power, and I think they are coming. I think you can always predict what they'll come in for every year.
Well,
more of the tourism tax.
Isn't it also true, though, that the way things have gone, and we've only got about a minute to go, so I apologize for throwing out this question at this stage. Maybe we can explore it a little bit after for our internet audience, but the counties need money.
Yes.
You know, the tourist industry has moved out into the parks, and it's all over the place now. It's different. They're not all in Waikiki. They're not all just in Kona. And the counties are hurting for the ability to take care of all these tourists, but the TAT money has not gone to them and so on. I mean, how do we deal with that? Real quick, Senator?
Well, we are dealing with that. The visitor industry, the TAT, more and more percentage goes to parks and to safety and to all those things.
State parks and state safety.
Well, you know, the county, it's a question, again, of priorities. That's how we started this conversation. And, you know, if they want the rail versus taking care of parks and everything else, I cringe if I have people from the mainland and they want to go around the island, they want to stop in a park. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. We can do a better job.
Real quick, any chance of more money to the counties?
Well, you know,
I'll take that as maybe.
Well, you know, I mean, it's $103 million on TAT that's split between the counties right now. I don't have a crystal ball on that answer really, because
we've actually run out of time.
They're always going to come in. And you're right. They're going to come in and they're going to fight.
Thank you very much. Good point, everybody. Great point. Great show. And I will wrap this up for now. Next time on Insights. Many of us take for granted our native forests as they serve as a lush green backdrop for residents and visitors and help provide us with clean, fresh water. Many of those same forests, though, made up of more than 10,000 unique species, are also sacred to Native Hawaiians. But in recent years, a lack of funds, invasive species, and encroaching development have put our forests at risk. How valuable are our native forests? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. A hui ho.